Hey, you know how you have the Dark Ages, the Stone Age, the Iron Age, the Renaissance, the Age of Exploration? Ages. Well, countries have ages too, like individually, to accentuate their needs and interests. And I was trying to look at Welsh history to assess what would be our ages if we structured it to benefit Welsh interests. And something happened. Well, that's better than the stairs. Anyway, so what happened? Come here. After the Protestant Reformation, when looking at these ages, I noticed that Wales simply almost like copy and pasted historical ages from England. Tudors, Stuarts, expansion, World War II, the Edwards, not Scissorhands. Anyway, you get it. And we're not the same country, so why are we organizing our historical ages as if we are? But to break up a country's history in terms of ages, you still need a common thread through them. England uses its monarchy and such. We don't have that because our kings were killed off. Germany, it's pretty much the language all the way through. We don't quite have that either because our language was banned from schools, courts, high-ranking administration and positions, scrubbed off of road signs. As much as I would prefer to use that, we're not quite able to do so. So what do we use to link all of Welsh history together into different ages? Well, this is Ben Llewellyn, and the answer to that question gave me this question. I know that Judaism is not the most likely of places to find a linking thread through all of Welsh history to collect it into different ages. Bear with me. When I was on the steps there, I wasn't even thinking about having this on. It's just something that I have in the morning on, and I tend to keep it on sometimes, maybe by accident, and yeah, so it's just on and we're going to go with it. But the point is, Judaism gave me an idea about what this common link is throughout Welsh history. It's not Judaism, don't worry, and I'll take this off in a minute. What do I mean? What is the common thing linking all the different ages of Wales together? And how did that lead to this question about when is the age of socialism, or Welsh socialism rather, going to end in Wales like every other age has? At every point in history, even perhaps pre-Roman, the area that is now Wales has had a different reaction to and different belief in faith than England's story and its reactions to faith. And this is a common thread. We have our own reaction to faith. Now, you might say, well, what's that got to do with you and this? Well, just because I have a different faith in Namibia doesn't mean that you're not part of that country. It's just that the majority always have some type of belief. But how does this apply to the modern era, you might say? And that is where Judaism comes into this, because I no longer believe, as I once did, that human societies can function without a deeper meaning to themselves. Not just science and law. Science, which explains how to put things together and take them apart and why they work, and law, which explains how to establish peace between individuals. Those things are good, but they don't give us any deep meaning that gives us something worth living for, does it? We would have always, in every age, Welsh people needed to have a meaning of our own and ourselves as a nation. And the more I looked into it, we have. At every point in history, we've had our own context for meaning that's purely Welsh. And so I broke down our history according to different faith periods. The prehistory, the deity king, the fusion of Roman and British pantheons, the rising of Christianity. We have evidence that the western bits of these isles embraced Christianity in a different way to the east. Then the age of Llan, the age of the saints. I could make a few videos just on that. Competing Llans, the national church, the rise of Deheubarth and Huala, the Cistercians and the princes using this monastic order to outflank England politically. The age of divinity, which Owen Glendower tried to grip onto his divine right to rule, failing, dragging us on for a bit. Empty, not really changing, until England forced us into change with the Reformation, and then we giving our own accent to that Reformation in our own way. England fought back and forth between Catholicism and Protestantism violently. That was not our way. And then quiet descent. And then non-conformity. This age was an epic. Then what happened? That age died. And you might say, well, we don't have any faith beliefs now, but we do. And I know you're going to disagree with me, many of you will, but socialism is a religion. And it has all the trappings of it. The belief in a utopia, which is unproven scientifically. The belief in a deity, which is the state. It believes that it can become all-powerful and solve all our problems. The belief in irrevocable sin, which is, I mean, if you hear the speeches of Aneurin Bevan, I mean, the way he talks about Tories is, I mean, it's like an old preacher talking about sin. A hierarchy of martyrs. So when you see the miners' strikes carrying the banners, these reflect not only in character but aesthetic the early Christian Catholic martyrs being carried in a procession. This is a faith. It's an ethos, and that's the age in which we are today, the Welsh socialist era of faith. This socialist faith has its roots in Gnosticism, early Christian Gnosticism, and it has a dialectical belief between an oppressor and an oppressed group, favoring the good of the oppressed, much like early Christianity, actually. The slave class became the sacred. Yeah. And so, how did this come to be? I mean, to understand how or when this age we're in is going to end, we need to understand where this came from. And actually, Welsh socialism has its roots in the age of quiet dissent and especially non-conformity, because it was tolerant enough to produce these ideas of universalist ideas, that would obliterate non-conformity. Because all ages do end, including this one, what we're in, whenever it does. And all ages have the seeds of their destruction in their values. So the fusion between British and Roman gods and the tolerance of many theisms is what allowed the coming of Christianity, a faith which was intolerant of others, much like we're seeing today in some socialist areas and certain protests in Wales, an intolerance being tolerated and promoted by the current faith, socialism. So to understand when this is going to end, we need to understand how this socialist age came to exist in the first place, and how did it replace the non-conformist age. And the Unitarianism is quite important. In 1802, the Unitarians of South Wales organised themselves at Merthyr. In 1806, local Democrats there led by Unitarians, formed the Cyfarthfa Philosophical Society. In 1810-1811, the first trade unions appeared on the coalfield. And this industrial bit, this was when the Methodists were driven by the Luddites, the people who, that didn't like machines, basically, to leave the church. In the 1820s, the colliers of Monmouthshire organized their first unions, and even dissenters started periodicals. And in closing, I just want to read this bit about Iolo Morgannwg's end. In the course of his lifetime, he and the people he had tried to shape into a nation passed from one Wales to another, across the most dramatic dividing line in that people's history. He's leaving us in 1826, just as a new age is erupting. It's not a Welsh tradition. I mean, it is now, but it's not where it came from. And this Unitarian faith that rooted in Merthyr Tydfil especially was its predecessor. So let's look at how this came in and where we are now. And Tisha Panad, do you want a cup of tea? Let's go downstairs. Wales became more Protestant than the Protestants as a way of expressing some kind of Welshness. I mean, there was a Judaism coming into Wales at this point, which I have to mention, but in terms of we as a people, how we viewed ourselves, this dissenting age was quiet. Very quiet. This was smothering the old culture that we had produced. And out of this, slowly you had figures that would emerge like Hywel Harris and these early Methodists, Pantycelyn. This hyper-localization was becoming so local that it produced almost a reform, a tidal wave of reform against it that wanted to create a society that was very stiff, very dire, very austere, and wanting to find some sense of unity, actually. And we did that by rebelling even further against the Anglican Church, which we call today nonconformity. But it was highly conformist. Yes, it was anti-conforming in that it didn't conform to the English way, but it resisted that conformity by being severely hierarchical and conformist in a Welsh way. This was not a culture, an age which was tolerant. And out of that, some tolerance began to break through. Liberal MP David Lloyd George, Prime Minister from 1916 to 1922, is often held up as the archetype of liberal Wales. But this is not true. This man was the final hurrah, the end, the climax of liberal Wales, really. He was a product of its zenith in his early manhood. See my video on his Zionism and how, without David Lloyd George and this nonconformist age in Wales, Israel would probably not exist today. These individual awakenings, this idea that only you could have your conversation with God, this produced a new way of looking at the world. This nonconformist age was bubbling up out of the dissent. The two were very similar, but it's different. Dissent was earlier and more within the established church, but increasingly and glacially slow. Nonconformity broke out of the church and took on a more individualist, liberal character. The liberal age, which came out of it, is not really a separate age. I need to emphasize that. The Liberal Party's dominance in Wales, which is quintessentially nonconformity in terms of not that it didn't conform to something, but that it was breaking away from the established English church. It's quintessentially a symptom of this age, not an age in itself. And it's that liberal, progressive, not socially progressive, but economically progressive, right? Difference. This meant that it wanted you to get on in the world. Let everyone get on. Let them be themselves in terms of economic aspiration, which I kind of like. But this open-mindedness toward capital created, well, it would eventually create losers. In any system that's genuinely fair, some people have to lose because we have different skill sets. That's kind of how the labor unions started forming. Yes, they wanted equal pay and equal rights, which I respect that. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that labor is somehow evil. It's not evil. It brought in housing reforms, NHS I support, NATO, it helped bring about the acknowledgement of the State of Israel, thank goodness, and ending the death penalty, kudos, and gay civil partnerships and minimum wage. So there's some good there. It's just eventually looking at the world that way, it exhausts what you're capable of doing. Because, I don't know about you, but I don't view the world in terms of the oppressed and the oppressor. It's just not how I view the world. But you had groups of people which were clearly envious and resentful, which were part of this. These nonconformist chapels were organized, they were efficient, they were able to build a political movement that was Welsh in ethos. By its own ethos, all I mean is that we had an idea of ourselves that was different to England. And this dissent that was before and this nonconformity, they are very similar, and it's difficult to even say when the age changed. You could take from the 1640s all the way until 1922. You could say that in terms of faith, that was one epoch. But I'm trying to break this into two ages here, because the liberal sense happened in the later part of it, and then what would destroy that and the chapel culture happened at the very end. It was very quick, the unraveling of this chapel liberal culture, because we had a new faith coming in, and I know people are going to disagree with me, but socialism is a religion. But it didn't just come out of anywhere. It didn't just appear. Within this nonconformist age, you had Unitarian churches, which were almost like an agnostic church, many of them, who believe that all churches, all religions are essentially the same thing. It's universalist, this Unitarian faith. And this was like the predecessor to the Labour Party and socialist ideas. This idea that you had this hyper-individualist nonconformity which produced the Liberal Party in Wales. But within that was the destruction of it. Because if everyone can be their own thing, if you include everyone, then what's the differences between us? What worth is there in anything being different? And that is where the ideas of the Labour Party came up through this Unitarianism. this agnostic view of God. And what you see then in the late 19th century is these trade unions coming in and replacing the chapel culture, replacing the Christian faith with a socialist faith. And in 1922, this is nothing new. It's been going on, building for 40 years, 50 years. But what's key is this socialist faith and its Unitarian predecessor came from England. It was not a native Welsh idea, but neither was Protestantism, and it's just as Welsh as anything now. 1922. I think in centuries to come it will be seen as significant as the coming of Christianity in the 4th century into Wales. Because it was the death, really the death knell of Christianity as the dominant faith in Wales. It was being replaced by socialism. This socialist idea, it lacks forgiveness. That's what's so different about it. It lacks the ability to cleanse oneself out of sin if you were not part of this system of ideas. It believes that we are all the same, rather than an individual relationship with something higher up. And it also believes that the utopia to come is produced by man through the state rather than through God, which the two are diametrically opposed to each other. You cannot have an idea of the hereafter and that utopia conflicting with a state earthly utopia. Now, I practice Judaism. I'm not taking either side directly here as which one's better or worse, Christianity or socialism. But they are both religions. And the state religion of Wales today is socialism. If you study Welsh, the language and the writings, there's a shift. As soon as you enter the post-First World War era, with some notable exceptions, you're into this Marxist oppressor-oppressed dynamic. The values shift in a way that is profound. I think, in terms of every age destroying itself, this is the age we are in now. But because socialist religion believes that we are all the same, it did something incredibly strange, actually. It gave Wales, our country, our assembly, and then, well, it's a Senate now, our own parliament, which is irreconcilable with the notion of universalism. Because if you have different nations that exist, then your socialist utopia cannot exist. The two cannot coexist, which is why the Labour Party in Wales has been so, for most of its history, so deadly opposed to any meaningful kind of Welsh national identity, because it's against their religion. It's not that they hate Wales, it's that they practice a different faith to the existence of the nation-state. And when I look at Plaid Cymru, I see a lot of their failure, actually, because they're trying to go at it from a global socialist liberation view, which is incompatible with nationalism. We have seen some reforms in terms of voting in Wales, and this may or may not bring in new voices. that are not socialist. I don't know. But in any case, people are clearly not voting. I mean, the majority of Wales does not even bother to vote, so you can't claim that Wales is a socialist country if the majority don't even vote. So when people do begin to vote, that's going to change the character of our country in ways that I don't think neither can we predict nor are we in any way ready for. And I don't think the age is quite going to change yet. But it is changing. And the creation of our Senedd, every age has what destroys itself within it. The fact that Welsh Labour became Welsh Labour is a sign that Labour is incapable of professing this notion of a globalist, universalist faith forever. And that idea of we're all the same, it's not really going to cut the butter. But the existence of our Senedd, created by the Labour Party, is the first seeds of what is going to destroy the current age that we're in and echo in the next age. Now, I don't know how that's going to come to pass. How do you think it will come to pass? As far as figures that characterize this age, Nye Bevan, Aneurin Bevan, he was very much of this Marxist tilt. He was proudly Welsh, but very much of this we're all the same kind of mentality, which means that there's no point in nations, and there's no point in a genuinely Welsh identity if we're all the same. But we are seeing a Welsh identity grow up out of the attempt of the Labour Party to build its stateness, its state god, essentially. So by creating the state, the Labour Party is destroying its own age in Wales slowly. I don't think this will get rid of the socialist faith. But what will happen is, like Christianity changed through all of those ages, this faith will change too. Will it take a more American view where it tries to divide us all into oppressor and oppressed groups and pit us against each other over petty cultural issues? I don't know. Will it create a reaction against it of conservative values that use the state to push back left-wing ideas within Wales? I think that may happen, but it's going to be a very long time. If I'm right, and the creation of our assembly, then Senedd, was the beginning of the seeds that will unravel this current age, then that would mean we've got another 40 years or so before things truly change. If it's of equal weight on either side of that point that divides the current age into two. We'll see. What do you think will bring about the end of the current age in Wales? Let me know. And may I give special thanks to my Patreons on the screen now. You do help the channel to keep going, and I appreciate it. And thank you for watching, subscribing, commenting, buying me a coffee.